Hello everybody, welcome back to the game room. I have a lot of wires in this room, but there's some people who are not fans of how I arrange them. It's always been my mission to satisfy those critics down in the comments section. But when it comes to wire management, I always thought there was nothing else that I can do with this room because there's so many systems and they're all spread out. The typical wire management solutions out there just don't apply to this kind of setup. But I may be wrong because I just bought something that could transform the wire management of this room. So we're gonna install it today and see if it's a big waste of time. Let me first establish what I have going on with the current wire situation. There are about 65 game systems hooked up and ready to play in this room. That means there's about 65 power cords and 65 signal cords. That's just a start though, because many of them have been extended one or more times in order to reach their destinations. There are also other devices embedded in the setup, such as rack mount power supplies, audio and video switch boxes, LED lights, game capture devices, and a charger for my toothbrush. The chrome shelving allows me to tie up many of those wires, but they're mainly held up by each other, if that makes sense. Behind each section of shelving are 2 or more arteries of wires bounded together with 2 things: velcro strips and black twisty ties. It's not the most elegant thing to look at. It's a bit lumpy in some places. Years ago, I used to have white walls, and those made the clumps of wires stand out even more. Those comments I showed earlier are from those years, but I eventually painted the walls dark red, and after that, the arteries were much harder to see, especially if I don't have the YouTube lights on. Hardly anyone complains about the wires anymore, but they do complain about the color of the wall. Dope. One of the things that has been suggested to me over the years is to hide my wires by hanging curtains along the back of the shelf. That's not what I bought for this video, but since we're on the subject matter, I do want to test it out a little bit here. I went into my closet and got some old curtains out, some very old black ones with a bunch of lint stuck to them, and some beige ones. The idea is to put the curtain in between the systems and the wires that are behind them. But in order to do that, I would have to cut a bunch of holes. I just want to save some time, so I'm going to put it behind the wires and see how it looks. And you know what? It's actually a lot better than I envisioned. I could have a combination of layers and just use them to wrap around the cords like this, if I were going to do this. And here's what the beige curtain looks like. Truthfully, I'm a little apprehensive about putting fabric on the setup because of the potential fire hazard. By the way, I addressed the fire safety of this setup in another video. If that interests you, you might want to watch that after this one. For now, these curtains are going back in the closet. I may reconsider this idea another day, and if I did, I would buy some new curtains. For many people, wire management involves putting the wires inside some type of tubing, but I've always concluded that this would not work with my setup. Tubing is great if you have wires that go from point A to point B. If you have some standard consumer devices like computers and TVs, you can get away with a point A to point B approach. But with 65 game systems and 2 TVs, there isn't really a point A and a point B. It's more like a spider web, it just goes in all different directions. And tubing does not work for that, or so I thought. As it turns out, there is a subtype of tubing that may do the trick, and that's what I have in the box right here. The Amazon listing calls these open slot wire covers. I'm calling it tubing as well. The word raceway is also a good term for this type of tubing. The box comes with a bunch of mounting materials like tape and screws and drywall hangers and stuff like that, but I don't think I'm going to need to use that. So what you do is you stuff the wires into the channel, and each wire can then exit out at any time during the run by going through one of the holes in the side. And there's a cover that slides over the top. There seems to be a lot of plastic dust, at least that's what I think it is. I guess it's from where they cut the holes out at the factory. Going into this, I'm not sure if this is going to work, so I'm going to start by installing just 4 of these in my setup, and I'm going to see how it looks. First though, I took them into another room, opened the window, and dusted them off with an electric duster that I have. Don't worry, that plastic debris will break down after 100 years. I didn't think these would be easy to install, and I was correct. In order to get the wires through these holes, you have to press a lot on the plastic between the holes. Between the holes. That sounds like a good title for my autobiography. Then you have to push the wire into place. The thicker the wire, the harder this is to do. And sometimes I'm pushing so hard on the plastic, I think it might break. Once you push on that plastic part, it kind of changes its position slightly too, and that makes it harder to get the cover to slide on. To make matters worse, I often have to do all this without using my eyes because the wires are in back of everything and I can't quite see it as I'm doing it. But I persevered and I got the 4 pieces in place, and I have to say that it looks awesome. People still say awesome, don't they? I learned a little trick when installing 2 consecutive pieces. Leave part of the channel uncovered on one part and cover that open spot with part of the cover that goes on the next part, if that makes sense. This secures the connection between the 2 pieces and kind of makes it look like one big long piece. It helps keep the whole thing straight. I am totally happy with the way it looks. The wires are completely gone, and I'm tempted to install all the others. But there is another step that I want to explore, and that is putting a coat of paint on these. That way I'll be able to hide even more. I still have the paint left over from where I painted the walls, so I want to test out how it looks. So I took the 4 covers off and I took them to the basement and I painted them. I'm only going to paint the covers because I think that's going to be enough to conceal everything else. I'm not going to be painting the part with the slots on it. There's nothing in the Amazon listing that says you can paint these, and there's nothing in the comment section from people who have done it. I'm using regular wall paint and I'm painting plastic, so I'm not sure if it's actually going to work. But I have the leftover paint and I want to use it, and this is just a test. This is how I learn things. If I make a mistake, I'll learn something from it. And I'll just come around and paint it a different way for the next round. So here's how they turned out, and it's actually not that bad. There's a few spots that I missed on the side, but I don't think it's going to be easy to see once it's on the setup. And here's what they look like when they're in place. I have to say that it's still looking pretty awesome, especially if you view it directly from the front. But when you look at it at an angle, the slots are very visible since they're not painted. So I have to make a tough decision. Paint everything red, including the sides, or to keep everything black, because the way it was looking earlier in black wasn't that bad. This is a tough call to make. Due to how time consuming they are to install, it's likely the decision I make here will affect the way my setup looks for years. So no pressure. Let me know in the comments what team you're on. Team black or team red? I had to step out of the room and compare the footage I shot already, and I finally made an executive decision. I'm going to paint it all red. So I hauled all the pieces down to the basement and gave them a coat of paint. Putting them all up took about 2 hours. It kept wanting to slide downward, but one way to stop that is to make sure at the top that you have 2 power cords going out 2 holes. They kind of act as a hanger and they keep it more stabilized. You might ask, why don't you just mount them to the wall? Well, I want to maintain the ability to slide this setup away from the wall because sometimes I need to go behind it and do things. When I slide it, I want to make sure the wires move along with it instead of staying on the wall. I was able to remove quite a bit of Velcro from the setup because it was no longer necessary. Here's some before and afters. It's definitely an improvement, though I do need to order more so that I can cover more spots. Underneath, the tubing kind of waterfalls outward, so it's going to be difficult to tame those parts. In this spot, I had to put 3 of these tubes, so it looks a little odd right there, but it's no big deal. And I didn't have enough to use behind the TV here. That's not that visible of an area, but I do plan on putting some back there once I install the rest of them. I feel like I've taken a very big step. Speaking of a big step, I made another video where I installed 3 new game systems into the setup. It's linked in the top right corner of the screen. It's a pretty cool video. May your games make you happy and smart, and may people respect you for playing them. So long, everybody.